Learn the secrets of success. Exclusive insights and information from the experts. Tag Radio. Ready to let your mind go wherever technology leads? Then tag, you're it. Tag Radio. Here today. Imagine tomorrow.
Network providers, content providers, and enterprises are exchanging networks and content as never before to grow their businesses. In the near future, he who has the richest network connectivity to the marketplace with the most secure and reliable co-locations and interconnection services will win the big game of mission-critical operations. Co-location, from meet-me rooms to power pricing, racks, cabinets, and cages, cross-connects, peering, multi-network access, the space, the power, and the tech support. Welcome to the bold new world of carrier-neutral physical layer interconnection, or what are now called core interconnection facilities. Greetings, everyone, and Happy New Year. It's Tuesday, January 1st, 2008. And this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. In today's bold new global hyper-connected economy, exists an infrastructure few are aware. Core interconnection facilities, crucial locations in key cities that offer access to the largest number of networks, reduce local loop cost, while at the same time provide the highest interconnected value. Tino explores the trends, the vision, and the leadership in this rapidly expanding industry with Hunter Newby, Chief Strategy Officer for the Telx Group. With over a decade of experience developing interconnection processes in the deregulated telecommunications industry, Hunter is a recognized leading expert. The Telx Group was formed in 2000. During his time as CSO, Hunter has led the company's strategy from its roots in New York City through its recent acquisition of 56 Marietta Street in Atlanta. Published author and a regular featured guest at industry events and conferences, Hunter is a contributing editor for IP Business Magazine and Vol Peering, a monthly series for Internet Telephony magazine. From upcoming trends to the biggest challenges, security and uptime on the web, to the explosion of voice-over IP adoption, Tino interconnects at its core with Telx CSO Hunter Newby.
Hunter, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk today.
Thank you.
Let's jump in by talking a little bit about overview of Telx. Tell for our listeners a bit about the company and how long you've been in Atlanta.
Sure. Telx Group is headquartered in New York City. We began in the year 2000 as Telx Group. We're in the physical layer network interconnection business and associated co-location space business to support the network interconnections. We've been in Atlanta officially since May of 2004 when we completed the acquisition of 56 Marietta Street, which is the key carrier hotel in the city of Atlanta, but also for the southeast region of the United States.
And why Atlanta? What was your motivation to select Atlanta? That's your second location, I guess, other than New York. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, from the beginning, where our roots are based in New York, we began in a building, 60 Hudson Street, which is internationally known in the carrier and network world as one of the largest carrier hotels in the world. And a carrier hotel is basically a building that has evolved over time to become almost 100% dedicated, not by mandate, just by evolution, with network operators, typically, metro and long-haul transport and such, as well as internet service providers and wireless carriers and the whole gamut. And more recently, enterprise network operators have entered these properties. In North America, there's really a handful of these carrier hotel buildings that are significant and matter from a core network interconnection standpoint, and 56 Marietta Street is one of them. So it was, from an early time for myself within the company, my mission to acquire and or run the main interconnection points in these buildings known as meet-me rooms, which is what led us to Atlanta and the purchase of the building. I'd known the property owners for about 2 years prior, built a relationship with them, and they had reached a point where they had decided to exit, and I decided to enter, and it worked out. And since then, we've added 12 other sites across the country.
Well, that helps a lot, I think, just to give a platform to ask you some little meatier questions here. But let's start out by talking about what your feelings and belief would be in terms of the biggest challenges that face enterprise networks over the next 2 to 3 years, and how can senior leaders, manage toward that?
The biggest challenge that I really see for them is managing growth. And that comes in a couple of different aspects, but the base level component is just an understanding or knowledge of the network itself. So from an enterprise perspective, we're assuming here in the context of this discussion that this would be a company that operates a wide area network. It probably has one today, currently, that's leased to it and or managed by a service provider. And there's all sorts of new applications that are coming out. I think that everyone's pretty well aware of what a lot of these things are. On the application front, mobile data that needs to be managed and also video content that needs to be managed. And these types of applications are putting a strain on that wide area network infrastructure. And in order to properly scale it, the base level understanding of the network itself, from the physical layer, from the fiber itself. Where is the fiber that the enterprise network's circuits run over? Where does it go? How does it leave each building? From a security perspective, that's paramount. And then how do you add services to that? And are they the right types of services that you really need? For example, the transition from legacy circuit switched infrastructure, circuit types like T1s or DS3s, and the migration over to fast Ethernet to carry IP, knowing where to find service providers that can offer Ethernet services and encapsulate the IP in a more efficient, effective manner is huge, and that helps the enterprise scale their network. So dealing with that growth, which obviously has multiple facets to it, and the baseline foundation of understanding is key.
How about for for Telx in terms of this growth, particularly with video? You have the capacity at your facilities to handle that with the current infrastructure?
Yes. Keep in mind, we are essentially in the real estate business. So we are a landlord, we're property owners, and we're a smart landlord. We know how to run a facility from an inventory management standpoint relative to the network operators in our property, where they are, and exactly what type of physical media they have, and then beyond that, what types of services they offer. So we are not a network operator, and therefore we are not limited by any of the things that I mentioned prior, but our tenants, who are largely the major network operators, the carriers and such, are selling to folks that obviously need to buy these things. And we're keepers of very important information. That's who they are, where they are, what they do, what they have, and we can introduce them to the enterprises that need those services so that they can scale. Our limitations are really physics, physical space, power, and the heat that the equipment creates, which then relates to the necessity for cooling. A lot of those issues are similar and found in the context of what's called a data center, right, which is not what we are. We sit in a different place in the network interconnection realm, whether we're on the bottom or on the top or whatever. We're not the vast, millions of square feet of data center space that's out there in the market for server-based co-location. We're predominantly and primarily focused on the interconnection of core networks. So, for example, an enterprise may have a data center, which could be 1,000 feet, it could be 10,000 feet, or whatever. And from there, they're going to have their servers and their applications stored, and they're going to be running replication and whatever. But at some point in that facility, they're going to need to connect to one or more networks to reach the outside world or tie back into themselves. And the point at which the greatest number of network interconnections exists is within the carrier hotel, and specifically the meet me room within that carrier hotel in the market that data center or other data centers reside within. So our opportunities, our ability to grow is really just to scale and continue to receive the inbound requests for additional network operators that want to establish a node on their greater wide area network, which could include, and many times does, their data centers and their offices and manufacturing headquarters or whatever. And we just add, another cabinet or two cabinets or a small cage for essentially transmission facilities from those network operators. So it's important for us to be able to manage the physical layer, to manage physical inventories of where things are and where they go, deal with tremendous amounts of power from the utility companies and such, to be able to seamlessly grow with the rest of the world. And we're in a very beneficial position as it relates to that, because the vast majority of whatever in the network sense goes through major markets like New York and Atlanta goes through Telx.
Moving back to the company side, how can companies secure their internal data across the wide area network and also ensure very important uptime?
It's a great question. It really ties back into the whole concept of understanding your physical network assets, the baseline. So one of the biggest concerns that lots of people have had over the years and still do to this day is security of their data, the sensitive corporate information, particularly in the financial sectors and the pharmaceuticals and healthcare, people's private information. Right. How do they protect that? And it's an interesting thing, and I always mention this in every presentation I give and articles I write, and I belabor it almost to the point where it's just, old hat for most, but amazingly it's new for a lot. And that is the fact that Internet protocol is not the Internet. Those are two totally different things. They sound similar, but they're completely different. Internet protocol is a protocol. It's a machine language spoken between and amongst lots and lots of devices all around the world. The Internet is a collection of Internet protocol networks that are stitched together in various interconnection points, including my own, at the Telx facilities and others around the world. But it is essentially a public shared network. So many enterprises that want to use IP, or Internet protocol, for their own networking to connect their various machines and connect to partners and customers and such, have this fear that it'll all be over the Internet and therefore it's susceptible to being seen or hacked or stolen. But that premise is wrong from the outset, because Internet protocol is not on the Internet unless you choose it to be. And if you're buying an ISP service from a provider to link your sites, then you are choosing to have your IP packets transit the public Internet. But if you instead decide to take the whole network architecture standpoint from a different perspective, and that is to build it from layer 1 or the physical layer up, the very next layer 2 that you reach, which essentially relates to the transport, it's referred to as data link in the OSI model, but the transport of packets from A to Z somewhere, that is done in a private and inherently secure way. And that's why I mentioned Ethernet before. Ethernet is a transport protocol essentially for framing that it works really well with IP, but it's not the Internet. Ethernet's Ethernet. And there are many Ethernet transport service providers out there in the world today that sell native layer 2 circuits that never touch the public Internet but yet carry IP. So the most important thing to know about the difference between Internet protocol and the Internet is that Internet protocol is not public until you make it so. And there are very simple ways to build a private and inherently secure network. Just don't have your packets route over the Internet. So you say, well, how do I do that? Well, you need to become educated about the questions you're asking about your own network. Who are you buying your network services from? Is it a public Internet VPN, a virtual private network? Or is it in fact a true, diverse and distinct layer 2 network that doesn't touch a router? And it's just provided to you by service providers providing the Ethernet links. That's number one. And then that also plays into ensuring network uptime, because the more you can take your packets away from others' routers, the less points of failure there are, the less congestions and hops and other potential vulnerabilities that you could face. They're dramatically reduced. And so again, the inherent security of layer 2 in terms of constructing your own wide area network infrastructure over existing fiber from a transport provider also helps you ensure greater uptime because you're eliminating additional and unnecessary network elements from service providers that sit at layer 3, which is essentially the IP layer in a public sense.
Excellent. Thanks for that. We have time for one more question. We started getting into a little bit of certainly Internet protocol. And how fast or at what rate do you believe enterprise VoIP adoption will accelerate over the next couple of years?
It's going to increase. I believe that there's an inflection point that's been reached, and that really has to do with adoption rates of voice over IP equipment in the enterprise. And that's been very well documented. I mean, you can go to the websites of most of the major hardware vendors that have announced customer wins dating back to, as early as 02, 03. And what they've essentially done is they've built voice over IP islands. And again, voice over IP does not mean voice over the Internet. It means voice over Internet protocol. And an enterprise that employs voice over Internet protocol in its own network, meaning in its office, in its headquarters manufacturing, whatever, they're probably running that IP over a wide area network. Now, we talked about the differences between a public Internet wide area network and a private Ethernet wide area network and the benefits and why, and then growth and scalability. But if you take the concept of the fact that this voice over IP island has been built, and it was bought, the equipment was purchased and put in place on some business case, but whatever the case may be, it's there now. That investment, the return from it, can be maximized, even compounded, by the enterprises becoming aware of the fact that they can actually send calls to each other directly without having to use a minutes-based voice service provider that charges for those minutes. That's happening now. It's something called voice peering. I write a lot about it. I speak a lot about it. I'm very familiar with it. And it's working. It exists today. It's out there. And enterprises can benefit from it tremendously if they've already put in place a voice over IP infrastructure. They can do so by seeking lower cost to terminate, where they may still need to send minutes to the PSTN or to endpoints that are effectively still being governed by a service provider that charges for minutes. But the vast majority are beginning to realize that they can actually peer their voice traffic with other enterprises that are of similar size or importance, relative importance to them. And this is interesting in many respects. There's verticals, whether again it's finance or healthcare, etc. There could be a hospital vertical, or there's already a brokerage vertical, and the brokerage vertical has been around for a long time. And these folks call each other, and they don't pay per minute to call each other. So the savings is tremendous. And I believe that the awareness of that infrastructure and the capability on the part of the enterprises here coming into 2008 will accelerate the growth of voice over IP adoption, because essentially the business case to deploy is built right in. Once you realize that it costs you less to do it and you end up with a better network, every minute that you don't do it, you're wasting money.
All right. Well, thank you. We've been talking to Hunter Newby, who's Chief Strategy Officer for Telx. Hunter, thanks for joining me on Tech Talk today.
Thank you.